I'm Zaya.
And we're from Something Different on WGMU at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. And we've got Jodi Eichelberger here, Stingy from Lazytown, both the puppeteer and the voice. And we're very excited to talk to him. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. You found me in Idaho.
Wow.
So we're on opposite sides of the country. I guess it's cold over there, huh?
It is.
A little bit. You're originally from Portland, right?
Well, I lived in Portland for a long time, and then I moved to New York and lived there for a long time. That's where I lived during Lazytown. I commuted back and forth between New York and Reykjavik.
Wow.
Yeah, my family has a house on the Long Beach Peninsula in Washington State, right north of Astoria, Oregon, and I've been to Portland several times. It's a good place. Never been to Idaho though.
No, yeah, that's a beautiful area.
I'd be interested to see Idaho at some point. But yeah, so we got some Lazytown questions, and we also have some stuff just generic about being a puppeteer, maybe a couple about Avenue Q and Elmo in Grouchland and living in Iceland.
Okay.
So I want to cover some of the stuff that wasn't covered in the interview that you did with Chris for Get Lazy. So we've tried to search through and think of some things you didn't answer. First thing was, how tall are the puppets exactly? How big would you say they are?
Well, it's interesting. They are the biggest puppets, as far as I'm aware, for television. The puppets you see on Sesame Street or any of the Muppets typically cut off kind of just below the puppeteer's elbow. These puppets go all the way past your shoulder, which makes it a lot harder to get your head out of the shot. And the smallest puppet is my character, Stingy, and the largest is Miss Busybody. And she is larger than I am as a human. So she's huge. The mayor is then next in line as far as the biggest goes. So I don't know like centimeters or inches exactly how the size, but I can tell you that at least in Bessie's case, she's larger than life and very heavy as well. I felt pretty fortunate to have the smaller one because it made it easier to manipulate and get around. But there's still, even if you just hold a half a gallon of milk up over your head for once you get past 2 or 3 minutes, that starts feeling pretty heavy.
Well, you compared the Lazytown puppets to like Muppets. I'm curious, is there a significant difference? Because you worked on Elmo and Grouchland. Is there a difference between like Muppets and regular puppets? Like, is there a quality? Are they a lot better quality than like your run-of-the-mill puppet?
Well, they're very different, particularly the classic characters. Like Carol Spinney was, until he just retired, still using the original Oscar the Grouch from 1970. So that it's a cloth. It's got some structure to it, but it's very low tech. It's pretty light because there's not a lot of controls or anything. The puppets on Lazytown at that time, Neil Scanlon was primarily the one involved in the construction and materials that were used for those characters. And actually, I was just talking about this today. One of the crazy things to think about is Carol Spinney still using the original head of Oscar the Grouch, and I went through a different head for Stingy every other episode. So I had a new head every 2 weeks. And he's gone, 35, 40 years with the same head. So it's not necessary. I don't know that it's like an issue of quality, but, in our case, we began in the world of high def. And so the skins were very flexible. And so they were designed to be able to have a lot of flexibility, which also meant they got wrinkles really quick, which the high def cameras picked up on. Whereas Oscar the Grouch will never show a wrinkle. I mean, because he's, made of like carpet.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. You mentioned that in the interview with Chris, and yeah, I was wondering if there's really a noticeable difference between a head from episode to episode. So,
well, there is, particularly between season 1 and I guess season 2, and I don't know how many people notice this, but in the early episodes, the eyelids on Stingy are attached to the eye.
mm-hmm.
So the whole thing pulls down when you try to close his eyes. It like basically pulls his whole forehead down. And then when he opens, you're pushing all that material up. And in later seasons, that was separated so that his eyelid could go back inside his head and it wasn't connected to the rest of the head. Mm-hmm. And then the other big difference is that his eyebrows got a mech so that he could move his eyebrows. Whereas in the first season, his eyebrows were fixed.
And that's all done with just the one hand that's inside of him?
No, the only thing the hand inside does is run the mouth. Then he's got cables that run down from his eyes and eyebrows that go onto the other rod. And there's little dials that you move up and down with your thumb. And those make the eyes open and close, and they make the eyebrows go up and down. So my left hand, when he's rotted, my left hand is running the mech for his eyes and his eyebrows, and my right hand is doing the mouth.
Oh, is that why he's left-handed whenever his hand moves? Because you're doing his mouth with your right hand?
Yep. When he's rotted, typically you'll see his left hand gesture. Sometimes he'll bring up both arms, but it's harder to use the right hand because I have to cross the body to pick up the right hand. And then, of course, we have lots of different hand styles, so we can switch to the live hands, which in my case was usually Julie Westwood, who does Bessie Busybody, would wear the live hands, and she puts her hands through the sleeves, and then she can gesture with her own hands. And then I'm still running the eyes and the eyebrows with my left hand, but we've taken the mech off the rod, and I just hold it in my hand.
Wow. What's the most like intricate, complex puppet you think you've ever puppeteered?
The most complex puppet. Well, one of the ones that was the most challenging, I don't know that necessarily most complex, but I did a marionette show called Fire on the Mountain, and I played a fiddler, and he was on stage with stilt walkers. So my strings were 16 feet long, and I was up in the catwalk, basically, in the light grid. And that was really challenging because I had to lean way out and support the weight of this 3-foot tall puppet who was about 16 feet below me. And also, because the strings were so long, if I hesitated with the next action, like I can't remember, like, oh, was this where I do this gesture? The pendulum effect would start to come in, and he would start to sway back and forth, and turn into like a pendulum. So that was pretty tricky, and just controlling a character from that far away was pretty crazy. Actually, some of the more complicated puppets that I'm doing right now, I'm with this company called It's Alive Labs, which just it's the same guy who invented the Furby, if you've ever heard of the Furby. We had a new toy come out called Lovabella. It's a little baby doll, and they hired me to puppeteer the doll and program it. So do the lip sync in 16 languages, and she has 4 motors. So I had to run the pass through, do the lip sync, then I had to go through again, do her eye blinks, go through again, make her arms move, go through again, make her head move. And it's all done with a stylus pen on a screen, drawing like curves that represent each motor. And so that was pretty complex. I mean, in a way, it's not really a puppet because it's a toy, and I'm not there when she's performing. But it was a really interesting, because when they first approached me, I thought it was going to be motion capture, which made sense. I was like, okay, I'll put on a thing and be a little doll, And then they showed me the system, and I was like, oh, okay.
Wow. Another related question we have is we couldn't find much about how you initially got into puppeteering. Did you go to specifically puppeteering school, or was it just acting, or what?
Well, my initial interest was from as a little kid. I just loved the Muppets, and I wrote the Henson Company when I think I was a sophomore in high school and asked, how do I become part of the Henson Company? And basically they wrote back and said, well, that really shouldn't be your goal. Your goal should be to pursue what you love, and that will take you to, it's a cheesy, but it's Muppet, the rainbow connection. That's what that is. You find the rainbow connection when you find your people, and when you're creating things that you love together. And so, I feel like that did eventually happen, particularly with Lazytown, because we ended up being such a great family there, much more so than, what you would think would be that rainbow connection would have been maybe Elmo and Grouchland, because those were the Muppets. But that wasn't, I didn't feel the rainbow there, I have to say. It was definitely more later getting onto the Lazytown show. And when I went to college, I chose a school that had a puppetry program. And then the moment I got there, they canceled the puppetry program.
Right.
So I actually ended up, I thought I was going to major in English because I was interested in writing. And I ended up graduating with a music major instead, with an emphasis in opera performance, which doesn't seem very related to puppetry at all. But at the same time, I was interning with a company doing puppetry with them. And when I graduated, I auditioned for a repertory company that did puppet and mask called Tears of Joy Theater. And they hired me out of college, and I went out in a Chevy van and toured around the United States with a van full of puppets. And I did awesome. I did 2 to 3 shows every day, 5 days a week for about 3 years, which was pretty intense training in performance.
Wow.
Yeah, so that so that's how that was my first professional puppetry gig.
And then was it off to Avenue Q after that, or did you have?
Well, I did Elmo and Grouchland first.
Oh yeah.
Because I was still at that company when I did Elmo, and then I came back. I had a company that I had with a friend. The two of us did some shows together. And then I was in Portland and got a call from this friend who said, they're doing these auditions for this part, and it sounds like they're describing you. You should really think about auditioning. And I was like, no, like, there's no way they're going to hire someone from Portland to do a show in New York. Like, come on, that's ridiculous. And so I ignored it. And then somebody else called and said, have you heard about these auditions? Because it sounds like they're asking for you. And I was like, come on, you guys, this is crazy. I went to Seattle. I don't even remember why I was in Seattle. And I kind of couldn't sleep at night because I started thinking about this show. And then a friend of mine who also was from Portland auditioned, and they called and said they got a call back. And when I heard that they called someone back who was based in Portland, I was like, oh, maybe I do have a chance. So I called up the casting director and I said, hey, I know you're into your final set of auditions, and I missed all the beginning auditions, but enough people told me that they think that I should be part of the show, that if you can fit me in, I'll fly to New York, I'll do the audition. And I didn't realize how close to the deadline I was, because I auditioned 2 weeks before the first rehearsal. So I did that audition. They had me come and do another audition. Then they had me come do another audition. And the third audition, there were about 15 people in the room, including producers, choreographers, writers. And I knew that I was close then. And then as I finished that, the casting director said, so when are you leaving? And when are you coming back? And I said, well, I'm leaving tomorrow. And I'll come back if you bring me back. And she said, you're coming back. And I had a week to pack my bags and move from Portland to New York.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty intense.
what were those in between shows with your friend you were talking about? Did you ever do anything like really avant-garde and weird with
Yeah,
puppets?
we did.
Yes.
We had a show. Actually, this show has been done on the East Coast somewhere too, although I wasn't in that production. It was called Whatnot. And the show started with a reel-to-reel player, you know, with the old discs of magnetic tape. And it had a sign on it that said press play at 7. And that's how the show started. And we were all dressed in spandex suits. There were 4 of us in the show. I started the show sleeping suspended above a doorway on the wall. Somebody else was like under a table. And the show was kind of an object theater piece where the shelf would descend from the ceiling and the audience would choose an object and bring it to the stage. And then we would do a piece that was based on that object. So there was like a love story between 2 xylophones. There was a story about this whole religion that animals had built around crossing highways. And that was called The Crossing. And this raccoon was like cheering on a deer, trying to get it to cross the highway. And the skunk was telling him how lots of people had died and it was all a bunch of bunk. And so that was kind of that was an interesting piece, and we toured that a little bit. We did one of my favorites was we did a production of Snow Queen in the South, and there was a question after the show from this kid that said, is the reason you use puppets is because this is by Hans Christian Andersen and you're using your hands? And I was like, that's great, kid. I like that association.
Wow.
That's awesome.
So then once you were on Avenue Q, you were only there a few months before you shipped off to Iceland, right?
Yeah, I was the first one to leave the show. And when I first got called in to audition for Lazytown, I thought it was a joke because this producer called and said, we're doing this show in Iceland. We'd like to have you come in for it. I was just like, what? Iceland? Are you kidding me? And yeah, so that was a tough choice because Avenue Q had just opened in July. I think the audition I went in for was probably in October. And there was a lot of buzz around the show. There was the possibility that maybe we'd be considered for the Tonys. You know, it was like the hot show at the moment. And so it was a tough choice to leave. But ultimately, 8 shows a week, the same show, didn't really fit my personality.
Uh-huh.
It's pretty tough to do that. And also I thought, you know, do I stay here and do this show or do I drop it and see what kind of adventure this is going to be in Iceland? Like, and that, in terms of life choices, that seemed like that was it. When I called the casting director and told her I was going to take this job in Iceland, she straight out told me that I was committing suicide as far as my career was concerned. That, you know, if I left that show, that would be the end for me. It definitely changed the course of what I ended up doing, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But for me, I think I made the right choice.
Absolutely. How was it that they chose, and like, I know some of the puppeteers, at least Gumi, are Icelandic, but then some of you are American.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know really why that is? Are there just not enough puppeteers in Iceland, or?
Well, you listed all of them.
Oh, really?
Gumi is the only puppeteer in Iceland. He's a lonely creature. Yeah, and you know what? He is so talented. And partly because he is the only one, he had to learn to do everything. I mean, next to him, I mean, I don't have to do anything for myself because I've always been around people who build them for me. If it breaks, they fix it for me. Like he does it all. He designs it, he builds it, he fixes it, he innovates. the original plan, and I don't think he would mind me sharing this. The original plan, and it's probably already out there anyway, he was never meant to do the voice of Ziggy. They were going to hire an American to dub over him for Ziggy's voice. And that they tried that for a couple of episodes. And then eventually, after working with him on the set and hearing him do the voice, I think a lot of people were just kind of like, why are you doing this? Like, his voice is so sweet. Like, it fits the characters really well. Like, it doesn't make sense to dub over that. Like, he's got like this great energy, and you should just keep it. And of course, that's what happens. So I don't believe there's any episodes that you do not hear his voice as Ziggy. I think he's on all of them. It's possible he went back and re-recorded over a dub, but I'm not sure if that happened. And then the reason between why some of us are British and some of us are American, I don't really know how that choice was made, except that they did audition in London, New York, and Los Angeles, I think. Although I believe all the American puppeteers came from New York. We had an intern who came from Atlanta, but I think everybody else, the Americans, were all from New York.
Is it common that I guess at least obviously on stage they have to do both, but in film that puppeteers do both the voice and the puppeteering, or is that less common? Because you said when you sing it's over a track, but when you talk it's live, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's an interesting question, because I feel like that's changing right now. Because what used to be common is that, yes, the puppeteer would do the voice, but we have a new version of the Dark Crystal coming out.
Oh, yeah.
And none of the puppeteers are voicing that.
Really?
So I almost wonder if the trend is moving now that the puppeteers won't be the voices.
Mm-hmm. With that being the trend, how does one, because you talked about being a perfect fit for some, I forget which role it was now, but for some role earlier, how would one be a perfect fit as a puppeteer? Is that just all like how you express yourself? Or because I assume some voice goes into that, but if that's fading out.
Well, the reason for that, I was getting those calls, that was for Princeton and Avenue Q, was because it's fairly rare to have a puppeteer who also performs as themselves as well, like as an actor without a puppet, and also who sings. And that's what they need for Avenue Q, was a puppeteer who could do the puppet, also perform as himself, and sing. So they've changed that formula now. They don't hire puppeteers well, now the show's closed, but they don't hire puppeteers anymore. Now they hire actors and train them to do the puppetry. But at the time, they were only hiring puppeteers for that show. So that's why I was a perfect fit for that. Yeah, now if the voice isn't a factor, then really it just becomes about your manipulation, I suppose. I don't know. I feel like one good thing is that I think you still have to be a strong performer, because I think they are dubbing the voices after you've recorded it with a puppet. So you still have to have that feel for the rhythm and for, setting the right tone for the scene and that kind of thing. And I imagine probably the actors who are dubbing over listen to the original read from the puppeteer. So that may also have an influence on how they're performing it, but without being in the studio, I don't know for sure.
Are there specific terms for like how one performs with a puppet? Like I know in acting you have like the Stanislavski technique and all those such things. Are there? I just love learning obscure words. Are there those for puppetry?
Well, there's not. I don't know that we really have a Stanislavski of puppetry. But there is a Muppet style.
Oh, okay.
which has developed over the years. I mean, I think that when Jim Henson and Frank Oz were starting out, they just did whatever they felt like, and they were just like goofing off. In fact, there's a great story about a huge crowd scene where there was this bunny in the background that was just going berserk and looked stupid or whatever. And they were watching the playback, and somebody says, "Well, this shot looks great, but what is going on with that bunny? Like, that's craziness back there." And it was Jim Henson who put the bunny on and ran to the back and started doing stuff with the bunny. So he got called out for it. So there are some things that are specific to that. And then actually within each show, there tends to be a style or vocabulary that gets built. Like in Avenue Q, there is a different style for that show than maybe for other shows. The most obvious being that where you hold the puppet is in line with your own head, it took a long time in rehearsal. They had to keep pulling my arm down because I wanted to lift it, all the way up. And so they kept like pulling it down so that the puppet was in line with my own head, which was very strange. The other weird rule in that show is that you could not look in another human's eye. You could only look in other puppets' eyes. So that was very strange. In Lazytown, the weird rules are that it was actually kind of against the Muppet style in many ways. It was important to Magnus that things looked kind of realistic in terms of how people moved. And so, you might see a kind of what we might even call a Muppet walk, where a character just kind of hops across the screen, And Magnus really wanted the walks in the show to suggest legs and the actual physics of walking, how a human walks. So that kind of altered the way that we manipulated the characters. The ground was super important in that show, which usually it isn't, partially because there was so much hopping and jumping and and you usually could see the ground in the shots, which if you watch other puppet stuff, you typically don't see the ground. So that made a lot of challenges for us in the way we had to move on these like mechanic carts and drag ourselves by our heels across the floor, which in a certain way defines the way we move as well. I'm trying to think if there were any funny terms that we would throw around. I mean, we were always saying ridiculous things like, I need some, bring me some tears and talcum the face and yeah.
Yeah, the puppet legs and the suits where they have, I guess, kids inside of them to make the legs are both pretty creepy, I think. Kind of freaks me out.
I found the kids the creepiest.
Yeah.
The sort of soulless faces. And, sometimes particularly, I feel like actually Stingy, of course, was the problem child. But also because that head was really the tightest. Those kids that were in that one in particular, I feel like were the most freaked out typically. Because it was very like claustrophobic. Yeah, I don't know. That was originally we tried to do a lot of green screen work with full body puppets. They built a whole set of these characters, which you only see, I think, in the original opening to the show. When Sporticus is doing some flipping and you see these full bodied characters. And the rest of we tried using those for other shots, and it just wasn't working. So then they came up with the idea of having kids in costumes and these stunt legs, which sometimes made it pretty tricky to do the shot because I'd have to like shove my arm between the waist and still get inside the puppet, and yeah, that could be pretty tricky. And then we had the stunt puppets too, which we would just throw around and torture, who have no controls at all. They just have like bendy wire inside, and you just kind of shape them to what you want them to do.
So it's basically just like a mannequin of the puppet.
Yeah. Yep. So that's what you'll see if something's flying through the air or falling from a tree or racing down a slide or something. Typically, it'll be one of those stunt puppets.
Wow. Well, I know we're getting close on time. We're running out, but I wanted to ask if you could do, like in the Get Lazy interview, you discussed how you formed the voice, and I was wondering if you could do that for our viewers.
The process of
I wouldn't want to put you on the spot, I know.
Well, the main qualities of his voice that probably everyone recognizes is that he's pretty nasal. It's like higher in the voice. He has his weird pronunciation things that he does. And the origin of that was my idea that he thought he was smarter than he actually was. And so he would try to use words that he didn't really know what they meant or how actually to pronounce them, which is how the triagonal word happened. Because that was Stingy thinking that he was super smart. But yeah, I mean, the set for it, I guess, actually the Mine Song is what kind of puts it into the place. So this mailbox is mine, and this triagonal sign, kind of just really high and his own particular attitude. I don't know. Do you have a question you'd like to ask Stingy?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is I would really like Stingy to say that either WGMU or something different. I would like him to declare that as his, if he could.
Oh, because your call letters are WGMU.
Yes.
So
and do you have
sort of soundbite?
Do you have some kind of catchphrase or something?
WGMU, your voice amplified.
Oh, right, perfect. And where are we again? We're in Connecticut?
Fairfax, Virginia. So,
Virginia.
Right, okay. Like 10 or 12 miles south of DC.
Oh, all right.
Hello, Fairfax, Virginia. This is Stingy from Lazytown on WGMU. My voice amplified.
Wow, that was really good. Thank you. You got any questions for Stingy?
By the way, I think WGMU stands for Will something my university. I have to think about the G.
Give?
We'll give my university. Would give my university. Would give them what? Give them gold.
There you go.
There we go.
Another thing is it's actually my birthday today, if you can believe that. So if Stingy's got any birthday words, I'd love to hear those as well. That would make my 22nd birthday.
22. Well, this is embarrassing because, of course, the thing he's going to say is the song, but what is it? Googly goo. Boogie boogie boo.
Boogie woogie boo, yes.
I can't remember the words.
Boogie woogie boo, happy birthday to you. That's not even right. What is it?
Boogie woogie.
I think.
Oh boy.
It is.
Well, he, of course, he isn't going to give you a gift. I hope you weren't expecting that.
No, I understand.
That's good. Well, happy birthday, happy 22.
Thank you. You got any last things?
I guess that's it. Just thank you for talking to us.
Yep, it's been
great.
Thanks,
guys. Yeah, thanks for keeping Lazytown alive.
Yep.
Actually, it's pretty funny. My niece is the age that Lazytown was popular when she was the right age, like 6 or 5, 3, 4, or 5. And she said, yeah, when I was that age, a lot of my friends knew the show, but now that I'm in college, everyone knows the show.
Yeah. It's a great meme nowadays.
Yeah, it's got a whole meme-averse.
We were like 7 when it started in 2004, and I feel like at that point, I was a little self-conscious about watching it at all because, you know, it has the reputation of being a preschool show, but I think if you're the age to be watching a kids channel at all, you might as well have been watching Lazytown.
Might as well. We always thought that it was marketed too young. We were like, this show is not for preschoolers, really. Like, but that's where they put it. So good thing we're at where we really should be, which is with college people. That's where we really should be.
You're right.
I mean, we always joked about the Wake and Bakers, even when we were shooting it. We're like, we know who our real audience is.
You're absolutely right.
All right, guys.
We have one last thing that Isaiah here just pointed out on our list of questions.
Okay.
Something that I'm sure the forums would want to know, and you don't have to answer this necessarily, but who is the best Stephanie?
Yeah, I can't go on record with that.
Alrighty, that's fine with us.
The one you're watching at the moment.
Thank you. Have a great evening. Thank you for sitting down with us. It's been an honor talking with you and Stingy. And I hope you have a good night. And this will be airing the Thursday after this one in a couple days.
All right, great.
Alrighty, have a good night.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Good night. Bye.